Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Foundations Live. I'm Chris Smith from Foundations. It's Tuesday afternoon. I'm ready to go for a Delta special. Right, afternoon, everybody. I'm joined today by Patrick Mullen, who's the data analyst here at Foundations, and about 20 minutes or so time, Patrick will be going through what he does with the data after you've submitted it and how we turn it into scorecards. So we'll see Patrick in about 20 minutes.
Foundations Live!
Right, afternoon, everybody. If you haven't been to a Foundations Live before, welcome. I'm Paul Smith, I'm Director of Foundations, and we're the national body for home improvement agencies and disabled facilities grants in England. And we're funded by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. So we're here to support you with anything home improvement agency and DFG related. If you're looking for closed captions today, they're available on social media, on LinkedIn, Facebook and YouTube. So if you're looking for closed captions, they're available on those platforms. Right, today, as mentioned, we're looking at the annual Delta data return that comes out from the government every year and allows you as local authorities to feed back your data to central government. So just a little bit of background to the return. It's, as I say, kind of the annual report that local authorities send back to central government to report on how many DFGs and various bits of data around DFGs, around applications, approvals and completions. It's submitted via an online system called Delta, hence the name, and it's somewhat earlier than normal this year. So usually the Delta returns are starting around September, October time for data from the previous financial year. But this year they're somewhat earlier, basically because the government wants the data sooner to support some of their ongoing planning around DFGs. As I'm sure you're aware by now, the upper limit is currently under review, and we're due to hear some more about that as part of the spending review on the 11th of June. And there's also due to be a consultation later in the year on the allocations formula. So all this data obviously helps the government in terms of planning what comes next. It helps track progress, spot trends, and guide the national support that we provide as well. So it's very much used to highlight how the system's working and shape policy going forwards. And for you as local authorities, it also is the basis of the DFG scorecards, which we've sent out for the last couple of years. And Patrick will show you a little bit more about those later this afternoon. As usual, we do have the comments open. So wherever you're watching us, if you want to post a comment, tell us where you are, what you're doing, that'd be great. Introduce yourself. And if you've got any questions as we go through this afternoon, we'll take our time to make sure that we try and answer as many questions as we can, because I know this is quite a popular topic for quite a lot of you. So I'm going to basically go through what is collected from Delta and what's in the data collection form. So I'll go through this relatively slowly so that if you've got any questions, I can hopefully pick those up and make sure that you're fully aware of what needs to go into the Delta form as you start to submit it. So the form for this year is to collect data on basically what you've done around DFG in 2024-25. So that's any grants that were approved, any grant applications that were made, any grants that were approved, and any grants that were completed from 6th of April 2024 until 5th of April 2025. So they're basically three sets of data you need to complete this form. I'll talk a little bit more of those in a minute. And it's not just standard DFG. So if you've done other types of grants as part of your housing assistance policy, some people do like a fast track grant or a home adaptation grant that maybe doesn't feature a means test, or if you do kind of top ups over and above the upper limit, all of those count. It's not just your standard DFGs. So please do make sure that in your data collection you capture all of the activity you've done, not just the kind of standard mandatory DFGs. Information is submitted via Delta, which is the online system. So you can go in, enter bits of data, save it, and come back out again if you want to, if you're the person actually submitting it. But once you've clicked a button at the end to submit, then it becomes read-only, and it then goes to your Section 151 officer to certify. So the main things to do, save drafts as you go, if you're not filling it all in one go. Submit it only when you've fully completed everything, because it becomes read-only at that point. And do allow time for your Section 151 officer to certify it before the deadline. So hopefully that's relatively straightforward. If you haven't used Delta before and you're submitting it, or if you're not sure who in your local authority needs to submit it or is submitting it, then we do have a email helpline that I will give the address for at the end if you've got any questions after this. But we've got instructions that help you get onto Delta if you're struggling with that. So in terms of the questions it's asking, most of them are based on different stages of DFG delivery, and the vast majority of the questions are based on the date of completion of the grant. So that is one of the key dates that's set out in the legislation. It's the certified date. It's the date when you're happy that the works have been completed satisfactorily. You might do payments and set land charges and other bits and pieces after that date, but the completion date you want is the date of it's the certified date. So that's the date when ground conditions kick into gear after the works are complete. So that's the definition of your completion date. The other three key dates that you need to understand as far as the Delta return, kind of working backwards from the end, are the date of approval of the grant. So that's the date when you've had the full application in, you've checked that it's all okay, and you're given the go-ahead for the contractors to start work. And that's the date from which works have to be completed within 12 months. The date before that is the grant application date. So that's when you've got your assessment, your drawings, your quotes, planning, your building regs, your completed application form, your completed means test, all tied up, signed, sealed, delivered to your grants team to start making the approval. So that's the application date. And those three dates are set out in the legislation. The other date that you need isn't set out in the legislation, and it may vary slightly from local authority to local authority depending on your system and whether you're two-tier and whether your kind of assessment is done by a separate team or whether it's done within the same team. But basically, you need the date when the assessment has been completed and received by whoever's putting together the application. So in some local authorities, you may be getting a referral from social care, either from the county council or from a different department. So that's the date when you receive that assessment. If your assessors are in the same team as the rest of your housing staff, then I would use the date at which point the assessment has been done. So it kind of gives you a kind of an equal, or it kind of gives the similar timescales to compare and contrast against. So if I work through them again from the start to the finish this time, the 4 dates that you need to know about and need to have in your system to fully complete the Delta return are the date when you get the completed assessment, either from somebody in your team or from social services. You need the date when the full grant application is made. And sometimes that's where the confusion is. So when you get the assessment or the referral, that's not an application. It's not the application until you've got the means test done, you've got the quotes, you've got the drawings, you've got everything you need to do that final approval. So you need the referral date, you need the application date, you need the approval date, and you need the certified or completion date at the end. If you've got those 4 dates in your system, then you're halfway to getting everything you need, I think. And I'll go through these as we go through each of the questions. But as you can see on the left-hand side there, almost all of the questions are based on the works completed date. So we'll be going through those in a minute. Then there are a few based on the grant approved date, and then just a couple based on the date when the application is made. So Dan, so with I think the kind of difficulty with discretion is that it gives local authorities discretion to do pretty much anything. So if your process is fairly similar for your discretionary grants to your DFG, then that's absolutely fine. If you do things in a different order, then perhaps get in touch with us and we'll kind of discuss the best way to present your data. But if you've got assessment, or kind of referral, application, approval, completion, in that order, then that's fine for DFG and for any other grants that follow that fairly standard process. So I'm going to go through the questions as they appear on the form. So I'll go through them relatively slowly. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to type those in. I'll try and answer them as we're on that particular question. Just in terms of that, we have actually we've done training courses with the Ombudsman, and if you're coming to the High Cost Cases Summit, the Ombudsman will be there to talk about how they assess stages as well as everything else in the process. Right. Okay, that's so Heather says you're updating your processes and the application is done after the feasibility and drawing before the quotes and means test are obtained. I would say that's not the application then, Heather. You can't make an application without the quotes and the means test. They're kind of key parts of the application itself. So I think if you need some more help with defining that, then please do get in touch. But an application can't be made without quotes and the means test being done. So first question is around local housing assistance policies. I think this is hopefully a relatively straightforward one. So the first question is, do you have a housing assistance policy, which is yes or no? And then if you say no, you move on to the next question. But if you say yes, you're asked to provide a link to the housing assistance policy on your website, which it should always be published to be in accordance with the regulations. And it asks you for the year that your policy was last updated. So what have we got there? So Andrea, that's the year that the government are looking for data on. Those are the dates they've given us. So for Amy, so if your policy is being renewed but hasn't been put on the website yet, I would give the date and the link to the existing version, and then give the new version next year. This will be recorded and be available on the website, where you're probably watching it now for the rest of this week, and it's also kind of perpetually on the on YouTube and on Facebook, so you can catch it at either of those places. So disabled facilities loan, if it's assistance and it follows a similar process, you count a loan as much as you would a grant. In some cases, a grant with a land charge is kind of in effect a loan for many people. So yeah, include loans as well as grants. So hopefully that's straightforward on the housing assistance policy. Do you have one, yes or no? Provide a link to it on your website and pop in the year that it was last updated. And if you're in the process of updating it, you'll put in 2025 when you answer the question next year. So the next questions, or next set of questions, asks for, and this is based on grants completed. So this is part of your data set or your query based on that completion date, that certified date at the end. So for each of them, you get a yes or no box again. And then if you can answer it, it asks for more details. So it asks you if you can report on grants completed based on age, disability or impairment, ethnic minorities, sex at birth, and veteran status. So I've now got a slide on each of those. So for age groups, it asks you to complete the number of grants completed for where the disabled person was within one of those age groups. So if your query returns a date of birth rather than an age, you might have an extra step in terms of calculating the age, which is basically the number of grants or loans where the person was under 18, 18 to 65, or 66 or over. And can't leave any of those blank if you said you can complete the data. So just enter a 0 if you've got no data collected and no grants delivered for that group. The next type is grants completed based on impairment type. These are the lists that the government want you to report on, which you may or may not have exactly the same list in your CRM system or casework system. So you may have to slightly match them up as best you can if you haven't got exactly this list, which I guess you probably haven't. But it's asking you for grants completed for people with these types of impairment. And it's if somebody has more than one type of impairment, then you count both types. So if somebody has a physical impairment and a learning disability, for example, you count both. So it's the number of grants completed by impairment type. Just going back to the previous question, I think in terms of making it nice and easy for you, Francis, that particular data set will be based on the completion date. So rather than looking at grant approved, if you've got date of birth come get of your system, I would compare that to the grant completion date because you've got that in the same query. Next section is based again on grants completed, and it's on ethnic minorities. So it just asks you to report the number of grants completed for people from an ethnic minority. So it doesn't ask you to break it down. So it just asks for the total. So all non-white British groups, including Gypsy, Roma, and Irish Traveller. So you just give the total for that. So Terry, if you don't have a feel for the type of disability on your system, it will ask you, do you record this data? You pick no, and then it won't ask you to submit the rest of the details. Grant completion is the certified date. So it's basically practical completion. It's the date when you're happy that the works have been done satisfactorily, which is probably before the payment date. It's a set date within the legislation. And yes, Heather, count as many categories as relevant. So if you've got people counted in more than one category for this one, you would have the total number of different conditions. I think that's kind of probably for your previous question. It's got the note there at the bottom. Count each impairment individually, even if multiple per person. And it says that on the Delta question as well. So I think it's probably right, Teresa. It's if you're collecting that on your application form and it's got it on your system, I suppose it depends how you collect it, but at this point, whatever's in your system in terms of ethnic minorities. I think, Andrew, I would record the ones I'd send in the data for the ones you've got, so that it gives a I think kind of part data on that one is better than no data, so I would send in what you've got. Next one is sex at birth, if you record that, based on male and female. And again, if data is not collected, just I'd say no or enter a 0 for the figures. And then the final one in this section, I think, is again based on grants completed. It's reporting the number of completed grants where the applicant is a veteran. So that's somebody that's served at least one day in Her Majesty's Armed Forces, regular or reserves. I guess that's probably the one potentially least likely to be collected. So again, if you don't collect that one, press 0, enter 0. Okay, that was all the demographics questions. Just before I move on, did anybody have any further questions on the demographics? So in terms of the case manager database, John, our new version of case manager called Instant Experts includes everything for the Delta return going forwards. And it's got the queries and the kind of reporting built in to answer these questions as of next year if you're using it this year. So again, Amelia, it's some councils collect it, others don't. If you haven't got it, then obviously you can't put it in the form. But if you've got it in your system, then government would be very, very interested in it as part of the Delta return. So the next one is again on grants completed, and this is by type of home adaptation, and this is the list that the government are interested in terms of the types of adaptation delivered. And similar to the one we had before on health conditions, if there's more than one adaptation type, then you count each one. So it's not the primary one. You count each and every adaptation type that you've got recorded on your system. So if somebody had a lift, a bathroom, and a ramp, for example, or a stair lift, a bathroom, and a ramp, for example, you count each of those and count how many ramps you've done, how many lifts you've done, how many stair lifts you've done in the year. Again, it might be that you haven't got exactly this set of data, but if you can make it match as much as possible. So, I mean, some of this is, you may not be able to answer, Sandra, you kind of understand that, but kind of for future years, hopefully you'll know that this sort of thing is coming. And I think that there's, as you've probably seen, the new government coming in have got quite a bit of impetus behind them in terms of DFG. So hence some of the extra questions. Andrew, 2 people sharing a lift, would we count this twice? It's based on the number of grants completed, so it's based on grants rather than people. I think you would either, in this case, Ellen, if you've got it described as other, either use your best guess or leave it out. And again, it's some of it that's kind of why I said at the start that for the first set of questions in particular, it asks you whether you record it or not, and you can say no and then not submit anything. This question, and most of the ones from here on in, I think, are, with one exception, are mostly questions that have been asked for a number of years. So the first one is, again, based on grants completed, and you just report on how many were done in communal areas or shared areas of buildings. I think, Alison, in terms of if you need to go through every grant to provide this data, I don't think that's what they're looking for you to do. I think most people have got a case management system where this sort of data is recorded in fields. If you have to go through lots of files, hundreds of files to go through this data, I don't think it would make sense for you necessarily to report it. I think in terms of the questions, Kerry, the questions have been quite consistent for a number of years, but this year there have been additional questions added. As I just said, there's quite a lot of interest in DFG and making changes going forwards. I think kind of in the past, changes haven't happened, so there wasn't so much interest in collecting so much data, but I think you've seen already that there's quite a lot happening, so hence the extra data collection. It definitely can be. It's included in the legislation that DFGs can be done in communal areas. And I don't know, Sandra, you'd have to ask Verity. So the next set of questions, this is again fairly standard one for the last few years, based on grants completed. So this is based on the value of the grant, and it's the count per grant in each value. So you only count each grant once in this case. So any grants where it's under 1,000, bearing in mind that most minor adaptations will be funded via the Care Act and social services under 1,000. And then you base your kind of questions on kind of the grant value. So it may be that kind of the grant is well in excess of £30,000 if you use your discretion. So that's kind of where the final category would come in. Next section is a fairly standard one on grants by tenure. Grant value including it? Yes, it is. Yes, it includes the kind of the total amount that you provide. So grants by tenure. Again, this has been asked for many years. So it's grants delivered to owner-occupiers, private rented tenants, registered provider or housing association tenants, any caravan or houseboat residents, and then it also asks for separately any homes adapted for council tenants, which would have been funded through your HRA. So again, that question's been asked for several years now. So it's total grants completed should be the same as the sum of owner-occupiers, private rented tenants, housing association tenants, caravan and houseboat residents. and if you got them council tenants. So a good check to do is grants completed should equal that total. So what they're looking for here, sorry, I won't attempt to pronounce your name, is if it's kind of equivalent to a DFG. I wouldn't count things like grab rails if you're doing those as part of a minor works program, but if it's something equivalent to a DFG and you don't have a DFG process for your council tenants, those are the sort of adaptations I would include. I think, Julia, that's what the question is asking for, the how much you spend on the case. So this is a question that's been asked for the last few years, and it's a so go back to the previous slide. It's asked for how many grants went to private renter tenants and how many grants went to housing association tenants. So for your private renter tenants, how many of those applications were made by the landlord rather than the tenant? And for your housing associations or registered providers, how many of those applications were made by the landlord rather than the tenant? So I've spoken quite a lot about landlord applications over the last few years, but it's something that hasn't been utilised very much, hence the question, or the government are monitoring how much of this is now happening. It's been in legislation since it was introduced in 1989, but it's not used all that much. And some of the differences are that, for instance, means testing doesn't apply if the landlord makes the application. But as a local authority, you have nomination rights and claim nomination rights into that property for the next 5 years. So that's kind of the quid pro quo. And it means you can have a different relationship with your landlords. We've got other videos on YouTube and on the website if you want to know more about landlord grants. Steve, it's in the Housing Grants Construction Regeneration Act, along with the rest of the rules around DFG. Been in there since it began. There's also a guide on the Foundation's website about working with housing associations that talks you through how that works in practice and includes a template application form which you can use. So I'm going to glass on here for this question here. Okay, I assume that's kind of referring to maybe some of the supported housing changes that are happening in the background here. So that's most of the data in terms of kind of counting grants by different categories. The next section is on working days. So this is what I was kind of saying before. It's really key that you do understand what the different stages are when they start and finish. Because if you're using the wrong definition, then potentially you're reporting back an average that is either shorter or longer than it should be. So the next few questions are about mean working days. So that's obviously working days is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and mean is kind of a standard average. Tot up the total and divided by the number of cases. So stage 2, which again it refers to in the Delta questionnaire, is from referral. So when you receive the assessment or somebody does the assessment, you've got completed referral of what's required through to the full application. So that's when you've got quotes, drawings, means tests, building regs, planning approval, whatever you need to make a proper full decision on the DFG. That's the end of stage 2, when you've got made that full application. Stage 3 starts at when that full application is made through to the point when the grant is fully approved. And then stage 4 is from the point where the grant is approved. You send to the contractor, the contractors go ahead and start, through to the certified completion date. So that's when the works are practically complete and you're happy with them. And Chris, for the purposes of this, it is a straight mean. There's no other guidance around removing top or bottom 5 or doing anything else with the data. It's just a straight mean. So one of the other questions, as it kind of says there, is the number of deferred grants. Number of grants that are deferred. So it's the payment that's deferred when you approve the grant. And I'm just going to talk through what that means. So the rest of it, I think, is hopefully very straightforward. It's the mean working days to complete stage 2 across all the grants that get to application stage within the year. Then it's the mean working days for all the grants that are approved within the year and the working days between application and approval, and the number of those grants where the payment was deferred, which we'll get onto that in a second. And then stage 4 is the mean working days from approval of the grant to completion and the number of grants based on that completion date in the year. So in terms of this one, Tracy, if it's all part of the same grant, stage 2 starts at when the first referral is received and you're following it through from that point. That's the timescale that the client or the customer sees. It may extend stage 2 potentially, or even stage 3 potentially, but it's unless you're doing a separate grant, it starts from stage 2. Can return contain a bit more influence, just that application is defined so it is clear at the time of completion. Application is defined within the legislation, Francis. So as I said, it's when you've got means test, quote, drawings, assessments, so you can make a decision. That if you look through the legislation, it's quite clear what a completed application is. And if you want to find the legislation, we've got a new page on our website that goes through the legislation in a lot more detail, and there's a copy of the Act with all the kind of unnecessary bits and pieces that you would find in the kind of fully published version. And if your managers have alternative views, then please do send them our way for the introduction to DFG course, because it's a very clear within the legislation what an application is. So how does it work when an appeal is submitted midway application? I suppose fundamentally you can't appeal until a grant is either approved or declined. So somebody may not be happy with the application in terms of, I wonder why they've signed the application form to submit it. It sounds like you may have something wrong with your approach there, Alvin. So if you'd like to discuss that with us, please do get in touch. But you can't really appeal something until you've made a decision on it. So what is it when you defer a grant? Well, it happens if you run out of funding. I think quite a lot of times local authorities stop approving grants and or slow down the application process. But the alternative, and I think the right way to do it, is to use what's called a deferral, where you can carry on approving grants, but you delay the payment date. This is some of the data from the previous few years. So kind of before and during COVID, there weren't that many grants being deferred, but there have been quite a lot, or quite a few more. It's still a minority in terms of the great scheme of things, but a lot more deferrals have been done in the last couple of years. This is from Section 36 of the Housing Grants Construction and Regeneration Act, which is basically saying that you may approve an application for a grant, but on the basis that you won't pay it until a specified date in the future, which can't be more than 12 months after the application date. So typically what that means in practice is maybe if you're running out of funding in January or February, you would still approve the grant, but we'll put a condition on it to say your grant's approved, but we can't pay it until the 1st of April when we get our new budget. So what this means is you can continue to approve grants, which you can say you won't pay. Usually you would say until the 1st of April. One of the advantages of doing that is there's extra money, as there was in the last financial year. Then you've already got your grants approved, and you can tell people actually you can go ahead. Sometimes applicants choose to pay and reclaim the grant because they know it's already been approved. If perhaps they've got a family member who could pay the contractor and get that back a few weeks later. And sometimes contractors in March may do the work in advance, and they will get paid on 1st of April. Because this is part of the Delta return every year, it's your way to show the government you've run out of money, basically. But I think kind of the key thing to remember is that you still have a statutory duty, even if you spend all of your allocation as a local authority. There was some case law back in the 90s that said that you can't refuse a grant because you run out of money. And hopefully the extra money has helped James, but I know a few local authorities were in that predicament, or have been in that predicament. I would say, Stephen, submit as much as you've got. Try and make it as consistent as you can, but some data is better than no data. So the next question is about local land charges. So most local authorities do levy a local land charge on grants over £5,000 to a maximum of £10,000. So the grant's completed, it's the number of grants where you applied a land charge, which is likely to be on your DFG database. But if you've levied land charges in the past, the money may have come back in, but may have come back in and be recorded in a different system. So that may not be in your DFG system. But if you can answer it, it's the total income you've received from redeemed charges from people who've had a DFG in the past. Should money received from land charges go back into the DFG pot? Ideally, I mean, it doesn't happen everywhere, but you would like to think it does. So the next question, I just missed a question from James there. Those 100% land charge with current 10-year conditions for discretionary elements of the DFG grant. So I think this question, James, is just referring to the kind of standard charge on cases over £5,000. Although actually it does, I think at the start say it applies to all grants. So I think, yeah, I've changed my mind, James, you persuaded me. If you're doing different grants that include a land charge, I would include those within your answer to this question. So Mike asked a lot of LAs seem to be deferring payments for the government increased funding. They increased funding last year, they've increased funding this year. So I suppose there's no guarantee, but if they can see that everyone's spending their budget, it's not going to hurt. Okay. Missed that one, didn't I? So this question is based on your data set of grants that have been approved within that year. So it's the number of grants where there was a financial contribution following a means test. So I know there are some local authorities that don't means test at all, so this will be a nice easy question at 0. But it's just counting how many cases had a financial contribution following a means test for grants that were approved. So obviously we wouldn't count any cases in there where they didn't get to be an approved grant. If they fell out of the process somewhere earlier, kind of before application, you wouldn't include those in this particular question. And then the following one is total value of contributions for grants approved. So how much following the means test did everybody across all the grants that you had approved pay last year? Now, this is a question that hasn't been asked for quite a few years, but it's back in this year. And this would be a slightly separate data set to your others because it's the total spend in year. So completed cases may have had an interim payment the previous year, or you may have made some interim payments this year and not completed the grant within the same year. So this isn't based on the dates of the grants. This is based on the dates of the payments, and I guess possibly come out of your finance systems maybe as much as your DFG system, but it's split into 2 parts. So total that you've spent on home adaptations either through DFGs or through things that are in your housing assistance policy is figure 1, and figure 2 is total spend on other social care capital projects, which is where money may have been taken at the BCF level, or used at the BCF level for the social care capital projects, which would almost certainly be outside of your DFG system. But the kind of key across all of those is that it should be capital spend that's being certified by your Section 151 officer. This particular question doesn't include HRH, just for DFG works. Let's have a look at what questions we've got. Would you include a calculated financial indemnity waived under your policy? No, it's just the amount that's actually paid. So if it's waived under your policy, then it's not part of the grant approval. So Heather, in terms of this one, I suppose it slightly depends how your process works, but if it's a mandatory DFG, then you have 6 months to approve it after the application, and it has to be completed within 12 months of that approval. So I'm not sure quite where the financial assessment and top-up funding appears in that process. If you cancelled the grant, then you wouldn't be able to pay the DFG, which sounds like you'll definitely benefit from coming to the High-Cost Cases Summit in July. Ashley, when we means test, we contribute some, we offer them a loan and do not provide DFG. So in this case, actually, you'd still count it, but anything that you wouldn't count their contribution towards the total. It's only what the applicants actually pay. If you're paying it out of your funds, then it's not a contribution really. It's you're paying it using your discretion. So I said this doesn't include HRA funds. Julie says spend 1st of April. I think that'll be fine, Julie. It's not going to be that much different. So total spend. Yes, it should say April to March. That was my slip on the slide there. So it's all spend April to March. So if you've top sliced, then that would either be through your housing assistance policy or through a better care fund arrangement. That's the only two ways you can use your discretion. So if it's through your housing assistance policy, that would be total spend on home adaptations. If it's through the BCF, then it would be total spend on other social care capital projects. So the spend question is just for DFGs from the DFG allocation, not for HRA. Social care and capital projects been paid for non-spends, do they get declared? I would include them, I think. Any spend, because in theory at least, local authorities can spend more than their allocation, and in the past that was relatively common. So it's how much spent in total. Don't need to get too more complicated with that. So Andrew, there's some notes within the question when you get into the Delta system. We've got a separate set of guides which talks through some of the things we've talked about today, which is available if you email us, and I'll give you the address at the end. Or you can just watch this webinar back. Where a two-tier county will spend social care capital, but they don't submit a Delta return. They still have to certify what's been spent because they get the money. So I'll speak to you about that separately, Mike, but that they do have to include, kind of county do have to kind of account for social care capital out of the DFG budget. Oh, excellent, you got a ticket, excellent. Jane, funding minor works, if it's been done out of the DFG pot, if it's been done through the Better Care Fund, yes, it has to be capital to be done out of the DFG pot. So if that's classed as capital, that's fine. So so the question here is just asking about how you spent DFG funds. So if the funding has come from somewhere else, you don't include it within this question. And these are the final questions. So these ones, hopefully, the easiest ones to answer. First one is, this is a new question for this year, but it's a yes or no answer. And it's, are you happy for the data to be shared with your BCF regional managers? So if it is, then we're allowed to share your scorecard with them. If not, then we can't. And then you just ask for some feedback on how easy were the questions to understand, your experience using the Delta system, time taken to complete, and if you're willing to take part in any user research on the back of it. So, just a question there for me, being asked on the chat. I think I've answered all of them as I've been going through, Ian, but we have a record of these, so if there's any common questions, we can certainly do an FAQ afterwards. So if you've got any questions after watching today, any further questions, we've still got a bit of time left to put them into the chat. And if you've got any other questions for us, we've got an email box, deltareturns@foundations.uk.com, and send us any emails there, and one of the team will get back to you. So what have we got? So Mike's asking, when will the 24-25 be produced, given the Delta deadlines are earlier? So scorecards will be produced earlier, Mike. Patrick's going to be talking about those in a minute. The only how you define DFGs that are completed, there's a definition in the legislation. It's the certified date when you're happy that all the works have been completed to your satisfaction. When we receive the scorecards, we've sent out scorecards for the previous year's data to every local authority. If you want a copy of yours, email us either at the Delta inbox or at our usual info@foundations.uk.com, and somebody will get back to you. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to like Patrick and his slides, who's going to talk to us about what we do once you've submitted the data. These kind of insights from having gone through the data for the last few years, and what we do with the scorecards, what they contain, and how we use them. So I'll hand over to you, Patrick.
Hi everyone, I'm Patrick. I'm a data analyst at Foundations. Been working on Delta data now since 2021-22 when I joined as an apprentice, and I like to think I've sort of improved some of the reporting that we do on Delta since I joined. So work on Delta sort of from the early stages of doing things like the the Delta questions guidance document, all the way through to sort of the final analysis that appears on the website that I do for MHCLG, sort of behind the scenes, and also the scorecards, which have been happening for the last couple of years. So yeah, I'm aiming to just give you an idea of sort of what happens to your data once it's submitted, some of the common issues that I spot, and sort of how that then can sort of undermine some of the conclusions that we're trying to draw from the data. And then eventually I'll take you through an example scorecard from last year and show you how to interpret that if you have any issues with that at all. So what happens once your data is submitted? So it goes to MHCLG, to their Delta team, and Foundations receives periodic reports from them on the return rate, including those areas that haven't submitted yet. I can sort of identify them and inform regional advisors of the areas that haven't submitted yet, and let them know who they need to chase up. So the regional advisors send some sort of gentle reminders and offer any support to authorities that haven't having issues submitting. And then once all authorities have submitted or given reasons to MHCLG as to why they haven't submitted it, they go on to close the survey. And then after that, MHCLG sort of shut the survey, send over a CSV file of the most recent year's data, which I then go on to analyse. So once the data gets to Foundations, I do data cleaning, so things like checking for duplicates, any sort of outliers, entry errors, null entries, things like that. So just removing some of the basic mistakes and errors. Do data validation, so I'll go through each field and make sure that the data in each of those questions is in the right format and correct, sort of sense check that. Then sort of load in secondary data from other sources, so Office of National Statistics, we use their data for things like population and tenure to try and see how well represented each age group and population group are within each authority, and sort of track the changes of that and the regional variances in that as well, and sort of county, local authority and regional level. And then data transformation, so creating additional fields and formulas that are going to feed into any analysis that I do. So and then merging the data, the most recent data with the pre-existing database that contains all the Delta data spanning back to 2009 and 2010. So it goes back quite a way now. We've got a pretty good data set going back over 15 years, so we can really analyze trends and across a number of things. So just going to talk about some of the common issues with the data, some of the more historical issues that we've had and how we've improved. We've sort of overcome those, and then a more sort of recent issue that I think could be remedied quite easily. So one of the more historical issues was the incomplete returns. So we had quite a low response rate up until 2016-17. So you can see there's quite a noted decrease in the percentage of authorities who are completing Delta. Sort of went down to about 70%. The year after that, I think prior to that, it was called LOGASNet. Some of you might remember that. And then there was a sort of transition year of 2017-18 where there was no data collected at all. And then 2018-19, the Delta service was launched. Foundations then started getting involved with collecting the data and assisting with that. And since then, we've had sort of around 95% or above in the last 5 years. So really good return rate. And just to show you what impact that has, or what the historical lower return rate has on our analysis. So the purple line shows the reported number of completions. So that's the total number of DFG completions that were reported in Delta. And the sort of turquoise line above that shows you the estimated number of completions. So you can see that as the years in which the return rate was lower, so remember it was 2016-17, where that was at its lowest ebb, there is a big gap in between the reported completions and the estimated completions. So essentially what I did was a regression analysis. I looked at the secondary data that was available, saw what correlated most strongly with the number of DFG completions, and it was allocation. So I've looked at the allocation in all those areas that didn't complete Delta in each year, and then multiplied that by the regional completions per pound of allocation, and then added that to the reported number. But the point I was trying to illustrate really is that you can see in the years where we've had really high amounts of completion of returns, there isn't much of a discrepancy between the estimates and the reported, because we've got such a representative data set. But just when we've got incomplete data, we really are making assumptions, and then any sort of analysis or conclusions that we're trying to draw are less valid, and really impact on any sort of policy decisions that are wanting to be made, or even just sort of internal, more local analysis that you're trying to do too. So moving on to another issue is inconsistent answers, or inconsistent values. So one of the things that we keep spotting is that we have a series of questions in Delta where, in an ideal world, the totals would all match up. So as Paul was sort of going through the questions earlier, we asked the DFGs by different types of tenure, so owner-occupiers, private rented sector, and social housing, and then different age groups, so children, working age, state pensionable age, and then the different grant value bands too, as well as just asking straight up how many DFGs did you complete last year. So if we looked at those totals for 2023-24, added up across all authorities, these are the totals that we had. So you can see that if we look at the values, there's a discrepancy of around 10,000 between the total DFGs completed by each value and those in tenure. And it kind of makes sense where you've got fewer values in those overall, because as some people were mentioning before, you might not be able to report on certain tenures or certain age groups. You don't have a complete data set, or you've transitioned from one system to another, so you're just adding in what you can. But it is quite common for, I think around 40% of authorities had discrepancies in these figures last year, where they're reporting sort of vastly different totals by tenure, age, value, and overall. And it just makes it quite difficult to come up with what the actual true total number of completions is in an authority, particularly when you're trying to look at the different demographic splits of where DFGs are going, and then you give them these figures, and they're not being consistent. So just spending that extra, few minutes just making sure that your figures are as close as possible across these values will go a long way to kind of improving data quality and overall just having a positive impact on the analysis that you receive in the end. So I'm going to go on to the scorecards now, and I think the scorecards were an initiative that came in last year. I did it initially as my project for an apprenticeship that I was completing last year. It was Paul's idea, and I think they've been pretty useful. And I think not only are we trying to give you something that you can use at your authority to give you a better idea of where you stand against the region and nationally, and make you just make appreciate that some authorities work can be quite siloed, and just trying to give you a broader context of where you stand in relation to those around you. But one of the main or sort of secondary things we're hoping to achieve with this is really improve the data quality of the analysis too, the data quality of the Delta data. Because I think prior to something like this, if you're not receiving many insights back from the data you're giving out, it quickly can become a sort of box ticking exercise. So yeah, hopefully you've had some benefit from these. And if you haven't received your scorecard, as Paul said, just please email foundations at info@foundations.uk.com or the Delta one too. So I'm just going to go through each section of this example scorecard. So it's an anonymized scorecard, and just give you an idea of what's contained on there and how to interpret it and what each of these measures means. So I've anonymized some of the fields, so I've removed the allocation in case there's anybody particularly really trying to find out which authority this is, but it's just a completely randomly selected one. So it shows you the DFGs completed in 2023-24, and the bracketed value is just showing you the yearly change. So this authority, local authority 6, is quite similar to the year before. They've only had an increase of 8 DFGs from the prior year, and an average value of 7,390. That value is just calculated. It's not asked because we don't ask for expenditure, although they have done in 24-25. That was just used by dividing the DFG, the allocation by the numbers completed. So it's assuming 100% expenditure of your DFG allocation on the DFGs that you've reported as completing in this. And then there's DFGs by age group. So we're showing the distribution across different age groups. So, and again, the values at the bottom show you the change on the year before. So this particular authority had an increase in grants for 66 and plus year olds, and a decrease in the other two age groups. And you can see that's reflected in the pie chart. They actually do more grants, a higher proportion of their grants go to 66 plus year olds than both the region and nationally. So if we move on to, this is probably the part of the scorecard that generates the most conversation queries. So these are delivery times. So it shows you delivery based on the number of working days for your application, so stage 2, approval of your application, stage 3, and then on-site, which is practical completion, so from approval to practical completion. The green bar shows you your authority, or in this case, local authority 6. The blue, the region, so you can see this region's better than, or faster rather than the national average, and then it shows you the national average in the sort of maroon, claret, and the changes are all reflected in the bracketed values again. The sort of bell curve you can see, or the distribution curve you can see in the top right, that's showing you the distribution of delivery times across England last year based on Delta data, so for stages 2 to 4. It only includes authorities that have completed data for all 3 stages that we'd asked for. So if your authority, you might have a scorecard and you've only submitted data for 2 of the stages, you won't see this bell curve in your scorecard because it's not a full data set. So we're only looking at those areas that submitted full returns on that. And the vertical line, so there's a little 5 next to it, those small numbers refer to the there's FAQs included in the PDF that you will have received or will receive that explain each of these. But that vertical line represents, in this case, local authority 6, and it's that x-axis is delivery time. So further you are to the left, the faster you've delivered the DFG on average. So you can see that they're actually in the fastest 7% of local authorities for delivery time. So, you know, one of the faster delivering authorities. So, and if you've completed all 3 stages, you will you'll get that insight as well on your scorecard. So finally, moving on to the DFGs by tenure. This authority is quite similar to, so this is a similar format to the age portion of the scorecard, where you've got owner occupiers represented by the green wedge, housing association and registered provider tenants by blue, private rented by the small claret, and then orange is caravan and houseboats. So you can see this authority had more caravan and houseboat grants completed than the region and nation proportionally. So, but other than that, quite a similar sort of split. Maybe fewer for private rented here than in other areas, but more similar to the norm in that case. So, just final thoughts from me. I think your data helps build a national picture, and the scorecards really do only make a small part of the analysis. There's last year there was a lot more sort of priority analysis requested by MHCLG, so a lot of extra stuff that wanted to be done as a matter of urgency. And I think you can see the appetite that the new government have in using data by the fact that they're bringing the return forwards by about 6 months this year. So there's a real interest in using that data, and just sort of the better the data quality submitted by yourselves, the sort of fewer assumptions that need to be made in the analysis and sort of logical leaps which have knock-on impacts on conclusions that are made on a national level and local level. So quite a few authorities have asked for, receive scorecards and then just asked for the data to be changed because they've realised what they've submitted in the Delta data doesn't reflect their internal records. So I think it's making people consider their data quality a bit more because they're actually getting something back from these scorecards. So yeah, just spending that extra bit of time just sort of on your end with the data quality would really help. Well, not just myself, but also anybody that's trying to use the data, for the scorecards or be it in sort of national policy discussions. So yeah, if you've got any questions, please reach out. I'm happy to deal with any.
Great, thank you, Patrick. We've had a few other questions coming, so I'll just saved a few of them. So Andrew was asking about last year's Delta asked for 5 grants over 30k, and info as of how they were funded. So Andrew, as you're hopefully aware, there's been an ongoing review of the upper limit that I think I mentioned earlier. The results of that will be part of the spending review next month. So that's why those 5 questions in particular were asked last year. So I think kind of this question that you've asked, Alistair, also links into kind of this question from Julie. And I think kind of what you need to think about is that I suppose the Delta return is really asking about, for the most part, how you spent the DFG allocation that you received from the government and things around that. It's not about kind of DFGs as they're set out in the legislation. They both have the same 3 letters attached to them, DFG, which is perhaps if the funding was called something different to the grant, that might be a little bit helpful. But in terms of thinking about your Delta return, the government's really interested in how you spend the money that you get each year that has the badge DFG associated with it. We've got, and I think this kind of goes back to what I said at the start, Chris, and what Patrick just said, the questions have been quite consistent for the last 4 or 5 years. And this year, additional questions have been asked because there are things happening like the review of the upper limit and the review of the allocations formula. So that's why the additional questions have been asked. And obviously, this time last year, the government they're in now weren't in at this time last year, which is why I think why the questions have changed. How much has the average DFG value increased year on year? That one's slightly difficult to answer, Russell. I'll hand over to Patrick in a moment to give you an estimate. But because in previous years the amount spent hasn't been asked, it's always been a bit more of a kind of a guesstimate in terms of what the average DFG value actually was. But Patrick has done some analysis of that. So what would you, how would you kind of term the increase, Patrick?
So longer term, the average value that we saw sort of at the start, using the method of just assuming that all of the allocation was spent, it was around 4,000 in about 2011, 2012, whereas last year it was over 10,000, so it was £10,350. And I think it's quite difficult to track over the immediate term, well, the last 3 or 4 years because of COVID. There was a massive decrease in DFGs completed, and we, not all of that. If we're using that method, it shows a massive spike in the value of the average DFG, whereas, what actually happened, that's just a limitation of the method where we've had to just make an assumption that all the allocation was spent on DFG, whereas actually it was just a decrease in activity in adaptations rather than an increase in complexity because of COVID. So, but over the past 5 years, since 2016-17, it was just under 9,000. Now it's just below 10,500. So yeah, it's increased in about, probably in line with inflation, really.
Yeah, I think this year, well, obviously knowing exactly what has been spent, we'll have a much more accurate picture. So Callie's asked about how useful the averages are when the extremes of spend and grant levels are so wide. I suppose that's why averages are really helpful, particularly on the timescales. I think they've been certainly the regional advisors that used them in discussions with local authorities. They found them really, really valuable. In terms of accessing the scorecards, if you work for a county or part of the BCF team, for previous years, you need to ask your district councils to pass them on to you. And if this year they tick the box to say they're happy for them to be shared, then we can send them to you later in the year. But for previous years, you'd speak to your your district council colleagues. And Robert's asked why there isn't a stage 1 inquiry received from service user to recommendations submitted to LA. I think there's probably a couple of reasons for that, Robert. One is that I think district councils would find that particularly difficult to report on if that particular stage is almost certainly carried out at the county level. So that'd be really difficult. And I think the other bit of stage 1 is that it's not necessarily always the case that somebody enters social care, knows that they need a stair lift, a ramp or a shower and goes straight to stair lift, ramp or shower. There may be other things that happen in between. It might be equipment, it may be other occupational therapy services, it might be the social services. So it's a lot less of a linear path through stage 1 to get to that kind of agreed point of assessment. So it's both in terms of it being potentially a bit of a messy process and it not being captured potentially by very many of the local authorities involved. So if we had any other questions since, let's have a look. Elected Kelly, that's obviously good for local systems, but because probably a good deal of local authorities wouldn't, it hasn't been asked for as part of this collection. And certainly, if you're recording it locally, Simon, I'm sure you'd find that very, very valuable. Mike, in terms of the scorecards, we were trying to come up with something that was meaningful and that had some data that went back a few years for comparison. So it kind of picks out hopefully the bits that's most useful to you. If there's other elements that you would think may be useful, and we may be able to kind of improve the scorecard going forward. Certainly, I think this year's scorecard is an improvement on last year's, and I'm sure next year's will be as well. So if there's kind of particular data that you would find useful, please do let us know. And yeah, we'll hopefully find out on the 11th of June what will happen to the upper limit, which is also my birthday, so it'll be an exciting day. Yeah. So Claire, that's an interesting one, because it's wonder if or how you certify that as capital spend. So it'll be interesting to perhaps drop us a line at deltareturns@foundations.uk.com to discuss that one. So Delta submission is now open. It closes, it's around the middle of June. I can't remember the date off the top of my head. I don't know if you got it to hand, Patrick, but I think it's around the middle of June, isn't it? I'm sure it's the middle of June. But thank you all for the questions, and thank you, Patrick, for joining us this afternoon. Really helpful. Thank you. So I think that brings us to a close. Thank you to Patrick, and thank you to all of you for joining in. Hopefully you got your question in and answered. If you need to watch this back, it'll be available on the website on demand for the rest of the week, or you can catch up with it at any time on YouTube or Facebook. Coming up, we've got quite a few more Foundations Lives over the next few weeks. Well, next few months actually. So we're going to do a recap of the Spring Roadshows in June, got a new report on home adaptations in July, new stuff on behaviours concern in August. We're going through some CPD opportunities from manufacturers and suppliers in September, as well as a special Foundations Live on the home adaptations installer network, where you can get all your contractors vetted and verified, but free of charge, rather than having to manage your own list. And I've mentioned this a couple of times already, but there aren't that many tickets left if you want to join us in Birmingham on the 8th of July for the this year's DFG Summit on high cost adaptations. It does include presentations from local government ombudsmen. We'll be talking about some of the cases where they've intervened, and some of the cases that they've seen. We've got as kind of psychologists, sociologists talking about how to have kind of robust conversations with families about what's kind of reasonable to do, or what's kind of realistic to do, and how to have conversations about compromises. And we've got an architect talking about how you go about creating new space, and got some comments from NHS England as well, and how some of their funding can play into delivering home adaptations, as well as 4 breakout sessions, which looks at, I remember them all off the top of my head. We've got one looking at kind of the outcomes and the cost benefits of doing high cost adaptations. We've got another one looking at kind of modular builds, so pods or kind of cranial extensions, and kind of the pros and cons of doing those. We've got a session on different sources of funding and how that applies to DFGs, and then a more detailed breakout session on having those conversations with families. So I'm really looking forward to it. It should be a really good day on the 8th of July. So there aren't that many tickets left, so if you would like to join us, please do. We'll also be launching the dates for the autumn round of DFG Champions Roadshows in the next couple of months, where we'll be out on the road again in September and October. So lots going on. And for those of you interested in the annual Healthy Housing Awards, those will also, nominations for those will also open soon as well. So lots going on at the moment. So thank you all for joining us today. If you want to watch it again, you can go back to the website and rewind it and whiz backwards and forwards through it. It'll be on YouTube, and we'll get the we've got the list of the questions and we've got what we talked about. So if it kind of makes sense to put together an FAQ, we'll see if we can do that as well. So thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. I guess for those of you who don't complete the Delta return, maybe it's been a slight diversion from a normal afternoon, but hopefully for those that you do, it makes it easier to submit this year. And it's based on four queries. So long as you've got a query based on completion dates, one based on approval dates, one based on application dates, one based on spend dates, you just need 4 sets of data, and you can answer almost all the questions. Plus the one about if you've got housing assistance policies, yes or no on the date. So hopefully that's made it easier. If you've got any questions, please do email us at deltareturns@foundations.uk.com. Thank you all. See you again soon.